you for some. Good morning, sir. Cheers. Thank you. Have a nice day. And our skies will all be rosy.
Could I take a closer look at this?
Oh, absolutely.
When the curator for one of the finest art museums in America wants to buy a painting, it must be very special. Something about this simple scene has captured his attention.
Good.
Something built to my attention.
But he doesn't know yet that he has rediscovered
Absolutely.
an American treasure. His discovery is about to open the door to a lost vision of America and the story of an artist who sought to capture the truth of his time. The artist is George Caleb Bingham.
He was a highly ambitious young artist.
He's a Westerner. He was a Western American artist.
Determined, motivated, passionate.
He rose from being self-taught on the edges of civilization to really being one of the most prominent American artists of his time.
I think Bingham painted great masterpiece paintings that kind of rise to the highest level, where they have become icons of American painting, recognized as critical in any discussion about the history of American art.
In the 1820s, thousands of families in America are searching for a new beginning. An enormous unexplored land has opened up with the purchase of more than 800,000 square miles from France.
Missouri is just coming into its own, and central Missouri seems to be the place to be.
George Caleb Bingham is just 8 years old when his family moves from Virginia to set up their new life here. They settle in Franklin, Missouri, a small outpost literally on the edge of the American frontier.
There's fur traders and hides coming in from the west. So this is an exciting place where Missouri is really growing and becoming something special.
Here, the Missouri River, a central path for westward expansion, offers settlers a wealth of financial opportunity.
The old French rivermen are still around. Bingham would have encountered them. We have immigrants from Germany, English immigrants. We have, of course, the Native Americans. So it's a very interesting mix of people in Missouri.
The people and the scenery of Bingham's childhood become seared into his memory. As a young child, he has a chance to see America at a defining moment. But on the edge of civilization, those moments can also be fraught with peril. His grandfather and younger brother both drown in accidents along the river. His father dies of malaria. Support for the family falls to his mother and her eldest sons, including George. The young boy had to become a young man. With 7 children to feed, Mary Bingham makes a brave decision. She moves to nearby Arrow Rock and opens a school for girls.
And Mrs. Bingham decides that what she can offer to the people in this area is education.
Next question. The sum of two numbers increasing plates, suit chest, half bucks.
She hires a woman to come in and teach drawing to these young women, and many people believe that that was Bingham's first drawing teacher.
Sit up, George.
As Bingham first tries his hand at drawing, he knows little of the art world beyond Arrow Rock. There are no art schools, no resident masters with whom he could apprentice. Unwittingly, he is on his way toward joining a community of American artists who are all learning as they go, alone.
Well, in the first half of the 19th century, you have a pretty unconventional art world in the United States. On one hand, you have a handful of artists who are European trained, and they are very good artists, and they lead the art world. On the other hand, you have a very long history in the United States of self-trained artists. If you think, John Singleton Copley was a self-trained artist, and he went on to become painter to the king in England.
Art for Bingham remains a hobby. He takes a job working for a local cabinet shop. He spends much of his free time obsessively studying the Bible. The tales that intrigue him are those of righteous figures who take a stand on the side of what's fair. Bingham takes these morality tales and finds strength in them. But his days as a cabinet maker do not last. In the days before photography, portrait painters traveled from town to town selling their services.
George Bingham.
One of them was Chester Harding. Harding made a reputation painting national figures. He was the only person to paint legendary explorer Daniel Boone from life. Bingham vividly remembered meeting the artist as a boy when Harding rented a room in the family tavern, allowing young George to watch him work. According to family lore, their disparate paths reunited in the late 1820s. Harding, it was said, encouraged him to gain experience by traveling and painting portraits for money.
Bingham writes about the impact that experience had of meeting Chester Harding and beginning to realize that he could make a living as an artist painting portraits.
It wasn't that he went to museums, he wasn't taken to any galleries, he didn't have paintings on his walls as a child. He saw this one example, and from that moment, he develops into a painter.
It's a bold move for a young man. But Harding's advice lights a fire within George Caleb Bingham. In 1834, Bingham takes the very risky step of leaving home to become a portrait artist. As an early calling card to prove his abilities, he paints an image of himself as a successful, well-dressed young man of his time. But his pride and vanity would soon be humbled. On his way to St. Louis to launch his career, he falls ill with an aggressively contagious and often deadly form of smallpox. After suffering months of agonizing and burning lesions, George Caleb Bingham was left permanently bald. he would wear a wig for the rest of his life.
Dear Elizabeth, I have some hope that I shall be able to secure my situation and have you with me. I would have written to you before, but sickness has prevented me. I am tired of living alone.
Sarah Elizabeth Hutchison, known as Elizabeth, was the daughter of a pharmacist in one of the river towns along his travels. Elizabeth proved a good sounding board for the struggles he endured while starting his career. They began a long-distance courtship and married in 1836.
He decides that he wants to set up house in Arrow Rock. This is Bingham's dream home, if you will. This is the place where he is going to raise a family.
As the river country prospers, so does he. Soon he is a father, and within a few years, an increasingly successful portrait painter. One of his first customers, James Rollins, becomes a lifelong friend and ongoing patron. Rollins recommends the fledgling artist to his wealthy friends. George Caleb Bingham will eventually paint close to 500 portraits throughout his 60-year career. His work becomes a status symbol, and his nickname to those in the state became the Missouri Artist. Almost every family, it is said, had the family carriage, the family jewelry, and its Bingham portraits. He has traveled widely, sharpening his artistic skills. As he reaches his 30s, he grows restless. He yearns for more. He begins to experiment. One of his first attempts to step out of the boundaries of traditional portraiture is in his paintings of his wife and son. Here he makes a transition from being a painter of portraits to being an artist who can sensitively capture a moment of everyday life. And with his new style, he makes a decision to show the world an America that few had ever seen. It will be some of the best work of his career. Bingham had made attempts to establish himself in a major city. Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York. But it's here, in the river country, where George Caleb Bingham always feels at home.
He felt very strongly about devoting his career to creating a vision of the Western frontier.
In the mid-19th century, steamboats carry people up the Missouri, and flatboats carry goods and livestock down it. Before railroads crisscrossed America, rivers and trails are the superhighways.
And he decided, since he had grown up on the Missouri River as a boy, that he could really fashion a storyline, not only for his local audience, but for a national audience.
This is the world he has known his whole life. He will capture it on canvas and share it with the world.
His great contribution to this desire to define America is to look west of the Mississippi and to look at Missouri.
Now the portraits Bingham paints are not only of individuals, but also of a way of life. and he tells the stories of the people around him.
And he is looking at those subjects. He is looking at the riverboatmen. He is looking at contemporary American people and how they become the definition of America.
Bingham begins his process as a sketch, creating his characters one at a time. He meticulously draws hundreds of sketches, creating a vast library from which he'll pull repeatedly when composing his paintings. His models are friends, neighbors, and people he meets. He seems to know them well. It is later said that his sketches contain a psychic presence. But it is when he places his characters on a canvas, they seem to come alive. One of his first paintings springs from his earliest childhood memories. His painting, Fur Traders Descending the Missouri, shows us the solitary existence of the fur trader's life. It is the first of his River series. It is far ahead of its time. One day, it will be called a masterpiece.
It's a very seemingly modern composition. The canoe sort of floats independently on its own. It's not connected to the landscape elements, but it's framed by this beautiful atmospheric effect behind it. And he has the two figures gazing directly out at you, the viewer. So it's kind of unnerving when you first encounter this painting.
For years, the techniques behind the painting are a mystery. How was Bingham able to create this solemn mood and maintain such balance in his piece? The answer is revealed through an amazing investigation done by the Metropolitan Museum that actually looks beneath the surface of the paint.
We were just blown away by the elaborate underdrawing. We're able to use infrared reflectography, X-rays, and microscopes to answer many of our questions. With infrared reflectography, you're allowed to go 2 levels below the paint surface. He created a beautiful drawing of the French fur trader, and then he perfectly transferred it onto the composition. What we found were all kinds of narrative details that he was considering for his composition. For example, he drew a very large bear. He put a small bear cub on the cargo mound. He included a mast and a flag between the two figures. So he eliminated all that narrative and just pares it down to its essential elements. And then one of the great insights that our painting conservator had is that she noticed that he used 2 very contrasting paint techniques for this painting. He used only a very limited number of pigments. She determined that for the landscape elements, the sort of atmospheric haze with this early morning sun burning through, he only used 4 pigments to create the mystery of the river. And then he changed his painting technique for the figures to very thickly painted, highly worked up and detailed presentations of the figures. So they are sharply contrasted with this mysterious atmosphere behind them. The one question we can't answer is how he knew how to do all of these things. And all we can say is that he was a highly ambitious young artist who used his genius instinctively to create a masterpiece.
Bingham submits this painting to the American Art Union, a national organization. The AAU, as it was known, acquires American paintings for a growing national membership. After paying an annual fee, members are offered engraved prints with a chance to win an original painting in a lottery.
Bingham was unknown as a painter, but I think the art union organizers immediately saw the quality and genius of this painting, and they would pay him a large sum, $75, which was a large amount of money at that time. And they were very proud to present this to their membership.
Bingham's original canvas, Fur Traders Descending the Missouri, is won by a family in Alabama. There it remains for most of the 19th century, hidden from public view. The second painting of Bingham's, The Jolly Flatboatman, is also chosen by the AAU. And that painting becomes a national hit.
So the American Art Union obviously recognized something in these images that reflected a national theme. And I think that theme was the opening up of America, the opening up of the frontier, the creation of this network of trade through the rivers.
Additionally, many of the paintings that the American Art Union purchased would then be engraved, and those engravings would be given to every single one of the members of the American Art Union.
With 10,000 copies distributed, George Caleb Bingham's work is soon appearing in homes across America, offering a message of optimism and pride. In 7 years, Bingham sells 20 paintings to the AAU. It gives him a steady income and the national acclaim and recognition he sought for his work. But what many may not see is that this painting is about much more than the happy dancer it shows. Bingham paints the common man to embody the strength, spirit, truth, and optimism of an American civilization on the rise. He is creating something uniquely American, yet universal in its message. By finding his voice, he creates some of his most treasured work. By the mid-1840s, as George Caleb Bingham paints serene scenes of river life, America erupts in a hotbed of divisive politics. On one side are the Democrats. They are the conservatives back then, pushing for low taxes, states' rights, and no national bank. On the other side are members of a party called the Whigs. They would be today's progressives. They want the federal government to build schools, tax imports, strengthen the banks, and improve interstate commerce. As the political battle lines are drawn, everyone takes a side, including Bingham. Bingham thought the Democrats corrupt and against a lot of issues he cared about. But in Missouri, they were in charge.
It was a group of politicians from the central part of the state that controlled the political fortunes of Missouri. And they were all Jacksonian Democrats. And many of them lived in Arrow Rock, which was Bingham's home.
George Caleb Bingham is quickly embraced into the local Whig fold.
Bingham was a Whig, so he kind of was going against the grain.
And the Whigs' support of progressive issues, such as improving river commerce, matched the strong, optimistic idealism he put onto his canvases. He first lends his talents painting political banners. But with his growing national reputation, it's no surprise when he moves from artist to politician.
This is made locally, so it seems to work real good for the guys.
In 1846, he throws his hat in the ring, running for the state legislature as a Whig.
I'm not not one of those who...
His opponent is a well-connected politician in a county that is overwhelmingly Democratic. Saline County also happens to be the current Missouri Democratic governor's home. For his county to elect a Whig would be a personal embarrassment. The vote is incredibly close. Bingham wins by just 3 votes. But his victory is short-lived. In the weeks following the election, his opponent brings political muscle to bear and contests a handful of votes.
Even after Bingham had been seated as the representative from Saline County, his opponent was able to get Bingham's election revoked retroactively. In Bingham's place was installed his opponent, Erasmus Darwin Sappington.
And in the end, Bingham loses. Two years later, Bingham tries again, and this time the victory is his to keep. But the joy is chased by sorrow. A newborn son dies. His beloved first wife soon follows.
At one point he said he was going to take off his suit of clothes, scour himself with sand, bury his clothes in the river, and never take part in politics again.
As Bingham returns to his painting full-time, he stays true to his mission to use his art as a kind of historical record. He creates a set of paintings that has given rise to years of debate. The paintings are called his election series.
I think it's no surprise that George Caleb Bingham eventually painted a series of paintings like the election series that are explicitly about the democratic process. The most obvious reason is that he himself was a politician and was very vested in the citizenry and how the democratic process works.
Voting in the mid-19th century was done in the open, with everyone hearing or seeing everyone else's vote. Elections were often a multi-day event, with a holiday atmosphere. Only white males could cast a ballot. At times, around 80% of eligible voters turned out, lured by food, speeches, and free alcohol.
Most elections in the United States were rowdy and boisterous. There's some wildness going on a little bit in the paintings, but for the most part, they are a concerned citizenry.
The backdrop for Bingham's series is Arrow Rock, and its townspeople become his characters.
For instance, we know that the candidate speaking is Erasmus Darwin Sappington. His opponent is George Caleb Bingham himself.
There's gentlemen in top hats. There's an Irish man who's actually the man in the county election who gets to vote. He's a little rough looking, but he's being treated with integrity and with respect.
Still today, Bingham's election series remains the subject of historical debate. What was his actual intention with these paintings?
Though Bingham is painting a very local scene in Arrow Rock, it's a scene that he's imbuing with national significance. But it's not all just how wonderful this process is. He's also finding ways to perhaps criticize the process.
There are points in the election series that, there's drunkenness and there's people who seem a little befuddled by their role. There's some sort of silliness and you might say tomfoolery in the images that might make you think that he's making fun of those laborers upon which such responsibility rests. But he's only making fun in the sense that he also clearly cares for them. There's a clear sense of empathy, for there are those who cannot vote at the time. There's African Americans in the scene and children in the scene.
It's perhaps Bingham's very subtle way of saying that we all need to pay attention. We shouldn't be so complacent. We need to be aware of what's happening.
Was he working to document an objective, often frank view of politics at the time? Or do the paintings reflect a cynical, satirical view that might stem from his partisan position as a member of the Whig Party? We can only speculate about the answers to those questions. But what is clear, he uses the election series to inject social commentary into his work. Bingham revisits one of his most successful paintings. His new version is called Jolly Flatboatman in Port. It is slightly different from the first painting. There is a new character in view.
Bingham adds an African-American figure who seems somewhat out of place in the composition, and I think it's because he's trying to make these symbolic connections with what's going on in the United States in a bigger format.
And what is going on in the United States is a debate that will rip the country apart. With this painting, 4 years before the start of the Civil War, George Caleb Bingham offers a subtle reflection of the tensions now underlying his once serene scenes. At this point in his career, Bingham is a celebrated artist with a national reputation. A commission to paint huge canvases for the state capitol provided a means to move his family to Europe, where he studied the masters. But his lifelong quest for fairness, justice, and the truth will soon place all he has worked toward in jeopardy.
When Bingham comes back from Europe, he comes back to a very divided nation.
He returns home to a people on the brink of war over the question of slavery.
The conflict on the Kansas-Missouri border escalates at an incredibly rapid pace.
Missouri is a slave state, and as the neighboring territory of Kansas moved to become a free state, violence along their shared border has been a constant presence for the past 7 years. By the time the Civil War starts, the hostilities between Missouri and Kansas run deep.
The raids back and forth across the border become increasingly violent.
In the winter of 1861, Kansas becomes a free state, but it enters a union about to split in two. The first shots of the Civil War are fired in Fort Sumter. But Bingham's home state of Missouri, a slave state, has been a war zone for years. While both he and his family had owned slaves at one time, by the time he reaches middle age, his position is now clear.
Bingham starts making himself a somewhat controversial character, somebody who clearly has stated his support for a unionist agenda.
As the violence mounts, Bingham joins the Union Army, but he is incensed by the treatment of the Missourians by the Union supporters from Kansas. Kansas men on the Union side routinely raid Missouri farms to free slaves, but they also steal whatever they can find, often burning farmhouses and leaving a path of destruction. They wear red leather leggings to protect themselves from thorns and brush. The red legs also serve as an intimidating reminder to their victims. These Kansans are also known as jayhawkers.
It was all part of a tactic to keep everybody on edge. And again, it was truly the use of terrorism. If you keep these towns scared, They cannot be effective. You can't go plow a field if you're afraid that you're going to be attacked in the middle of the day.
Some of Missouri's young men turned to riding in independent Confederate guerrilla bands and create havoc amidst the Union war effort. Under leaders such as William Quantrill, they raid across the border into Kansas. Today, it would be called insurgents. Attempts to quell the constant attacks from Missouri guerrilla fighters along the border failed. The Union command in Kansas City devised a strategy to strike at targets near and dear to the Missouri guerrilla fighters' hearts.
One step that they take is to arrest the women. They decide to arrest the sisters, the relatives of known guerrillas that they can find because they, I think rightly, suppose that these women are providing food, shelter, clothing to these male guerrillas.
The very fact that the federal authorities would put women and children in jail, that was hugely insulting.
The jail is not a traditional jail. It just happens to be the 3-story house in Kansas City that belongs to George Bingham. He has not lived in the building for several years. Union troops took it over without his knowledge. It is around dinner time on August 13, 1863, when the unthinkable happened. Prisoners begin to feel a strange sensation. The building is shaking on its foundation. The building collapses, killing 5 of 17 women inmates and permanently maiming many more.
There were a lot of people who believed that the federal authorities had intentionally allowed this building to be compromised and to fall on them, and knowing that some would be injured and killed in the process.
Whatever the cause, it was no secret that the Union authorities knew the building to be unstable.
Bingham felt guilty about the jail collapse. I think he very much resented that his home had been used in this capacity without his knowledge.
Have they said what's caused this?
This building stood just fine till the soldiers moved in then.
He felt anger about the way his home had been used, especially if you find out that a 14-year-old girl was killed because the house was not stable enough.
And that 14-year-old girl happened to be the younger sister of noted Missouri guerrilla, Bloody Bill Anderson.
We can't even emphasize the impact that has on western Missouri, because now war has a whole new meaning. And if you can take war to civilians, those Confederate sympathizers decide, we'll give you war on civilians.
Within a week of the Kansas City jail collapse, rebel guerrillas under William Quantrill ride into Lawrence, Kansas with lists of men to be killed and buildings to be put to the torch. For those guerrillas with wives and sisters barely a week in their graves, the tragedy helps fan the killing in Lawrence. Stores are looted, buildings burned, and almost 200 men and boys lie dead, most of them shot at point-blank range.
Supposedly, when the guerrilla fighters attacked Lawrence, Kansas, early on that fateful morning, they shouted, "Remember the women in Kansas City."
The Lawrence Massacre, as it came to be known, shocked the nation. In response, the Union Army resorts to an extreme measure to put an end to the kind of violence that killed so many in Lawrence. Known as Order Number 11, Union General Thomas Ewing commands the Union Army to forcefully evacuate those living in all or part of 4 Missouri counties along the Kansas border. Their goal: to deprive Missouri guerrillas of places to hide and supply when they came back across the border.
We often don't think of refugees in the United States of America, but right here in Missouri, we had refugees.
We have residents in the western counties of Missouri being told to evacuate no matter what their political stripe.
These innocent people, these civilians, are devastated by having to pack up everything they own and evacuate the area.
As many as 30,000 people, mostly women and children, are forced out of their homes.
The men are in the Army or have left the area. The Union hired Kansas militia groups to enforce the order in many places. There was no consideration of the fact that many of these militia groups hated Missourians. And so these groups are told that they are to burn the fields. But these redlegs, these Kansans, burn the houses.
In order to get control over guerrilla warfare, the Kansas Jayhawkers came in and destroyed much of what was left.
People were not only left without a home, their homes were looted. It's a devastating moment in the history of the war in Missouri. This is retribution for bloody Kansas in the 1850s. It comes to be known as the Burnt District after the war, and most families don't return.
Among those who are horrified by the forced evacuation is George Caleb Bingham. As the ashes of the Great War settle, he vows to tell the world what happened here. Bingham creates what would be his most controversial work. The painting will be known as Order Number 11, but the full title includes the phrase martial law. He believes America needs to understand the perils of granting the military absolute authority over its citizens.
Bingham, as a resident of Missouri, but also as a supporter of the Union, was conflicted. And it took him a while before he was able to get that out in paint.
A lot of people don't realize is that a painting of this size and scale takes several months just to plan. So he would have done multiple sketches, multiple studies in preparation for this before he even began to put paint to canvas. Bingham puts a redleg right in the center of the picture, and this would have immediately identified to those in the know that this person was from Kansas. There was this animosity between Kansans and Missourians, and that this was really an abuse of power.
It really is Bingham painting with a clenched fist. That anger is spilling out on his canvas.
Bingham travels far and wide, proudly displaying his enormous painting in hopes of raising awareness throughout the Union of the atrocities committed in Missouri. He also lobbies the federal government to give compensation to the Order Number 11 victims.
Bingham was criticized for representing people wearing the Union uniform behaving so badly.
The public response is not what he expects. While some feel empathy for the suffering depicted in the painting, others see it as an act of dissension that teeters on the brink of treason.
The Unionists immediately thought they were being villainized.
He was accused of being a Southern sympathizer, but he wrote extensively about how that was not the case, how he was not advocating for slavery, how he was not sympathizing for the Confederate cause.
People see this painting as overly dramatic, and it doesn't really fit into modern tastes.
I think it doesn't show the subtleties and nuances that many of his genre scenes do show. I think it was difficult for him to be as subtle or as sensitive as he may have been in other contexts.
One historian writes that the painting is excellent propaganda, but mediocre art.
I think today we can step back and look at it a little differently. We can see the power of this image.
His pictures were about liberty, and they were about freedom, and it was against martial law.
For years, his painting brings tremendous attention to a powerful moment in history. But the controversy it raises will haunt him. His reputation in the community as a respected artist and citizen was damaged. His career would never be the same. He had notoriety, but not the kind he sought. He spent more and more of his time defending himself against accusations he was anti-Union or pro-Confederate. In his modest Kansas City studio, he could still paint portraits for income. But he struggled to finish works, and commissions never came. In 1879, at the age of 68, Bingham dies from respiratory failure. George Caleb Bingham's paintings were scattered across the country, undocumented and mostly unsigned. Many were sold at auction. Except for a few galleries in St. Louis and private homes, his legacy seemed destined to be one of obscurity. Largely forgotten for more than 50 years, Bingham's genius lay hidden for the next generation to uncover.
The opportunity that we took here at the Met was really to answer the question of how did this young artist who was self-taught, who had started his career painting folk paintings, suddenly create one of the great icons of American painting at such a young age.
Here's an artist who understood that river well, understood the currents, this particular nature of the water, the cloudy brown nature of it, the particular kinds of trees that are on the banks, and that fabulous light on the river in the morning. I think his election series and other ones of his genre are still important because we still struggle with what is democracy and how does it work and how well do we maintain it.
When we think about Bingham today, it's impossible not to remember all of those faces of Missourians that he painted, the scenes of riverboats, the scenes of political life on the frontier, and the way that he constructed an American identity out of Missouri, yet an identity that had resonance on a national scale.
I think when visitors from other countries come to see American art, they really do want to see Western imagery. They want to see things that in their mind represent the early history of the American West. And I would have to say that Bingham captured these images probably more profoundly than any artist did in the 19th century.
George Caleb Bingham witnessed the rise of a civilization. In each bold and masterful stroke, he showed us an America we could be proud of. But he pointed out her flaws with equal dexterity. The great Missouri River bent under his brush, and hundreds of stories poured from her banks. His prolific achievements and resilience as a self-taught painter, politician, and pioneer defined the unique life he lived as being distinctly American.